in this video, we're going to be taking a road trip. And not just any road trip. We're going to be taking an entire weekend to tour Arizona. Why, you ask? Because I am getting ready to purchase my very first official bug out location. So make sure you subscribe and you come along for the adventure because it is gonna be awesome. For almost 2 years now, I have been living and traveling in the 2004 GMC school bus that I converted into a tiny home / bug out vehicle. And since the coronavirus pandemic started, it has truly shown me that no matter how much of a nomadic soul we are, we all need a home base. And we all need somewhere to escape to when the chaos happens. So in this video, I want to talk to you guys about selecting a bug out location. Now, although we've talked about bug out bags and, evacuation bags on my channel in the past, we've never actually discussed evacuating our homes and where are we actually going to evacuate to. So in this video, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about what I am looking for in a bug out location, which may give you some pointers about what you should also be looking for when you create your bug out locations. And not just are we going to be talking about the bug out locations, but you and I are going to be taking a road trip to Arizona to check out all of the different properties that I'm looking at purchasing for our first official out-of-state bug out location. So are you ready? Let's get to it. The first thing that I look for when I select a bug out location is elevation. And although that's not the first thing that may come to mind when you think about bug out locations, the reason I say elevation is important is because you want to make sure that this property is going to be available to you in the long term, even hundreds of years from now when you want to pass it on to your family. And with the ocean sea level rising as quickly as it is, we really want to make sure that we keep our family up at least above 3,000 feet with the rising sea levels. And I know that this is not something that is a high priority, but when I'm looking at property and I'm looking at purchasing land, I want to make sure that this land is going to be around longer than I am and that it's going to outlast at least a few generations in my family. So that is something that is important to me. And also because you never know what type of disaster we may encounter. And the higher you are out of eyesight, the better. So I like to make sure that elevation is something that I keep in mind in the property that I'm going to purchase for my first bug out location. The second thing I look at is the terrain. So I'll get on Google Earth and just check out the area around it and just really look at what the topography looks like and what I'm actually dealing with in the neighboring areas. I really like to make sure I can physically drive to these locations, make sure that my vehicle doesn't get stuck because yes, that happened. So we're literally in the middle of nowhere, like stuck here. The bus got stuck down there in the middle of like sand. And I have traction boards, but they didn't help at all. So we're waiting for the roadside assistance to come off-road in the sand to dig us out. Great memories, guys. And I wanted to make sure that I can physically access the location and the property, and not just physically access it because anyone can access a lot of properties with 4x4, but you also want to make sure that you have legal and physical access to the location. If you don't have 4x4, you want to make sure that your vehicle can not just one, get to the location, but two, legally access it. Making sure that you have legal access to the property is highly important, because you could be purchasing a parcel that is behind someone's property and is not even touching a county road of some sort or a dirt road that will actually provide a easement or a way to your property. You want to make sure you look at easements and make sure that you have a legal way. Even if you have to cut it yourself and you're going that off grid, you want to make sure that you have legal access to get there, and that legally you have the right to cut a road if there isn't one there in order to get to your property. Because when you're looking at off-grid locations and bug-out locations, you're looking at very remote places, hopefully. And that way, you can really make sure you get the best out of your land and that you don't get cheated with a location that you can't even get to in an emergency. Another thing that I like to do when I get to a bug out location is to take some drone footage of the area. Not just to get your own bird's eye view, besides the Google Maps and Google Earth, but to also really check out who is currently in that area. Who are your neighbors? What type of structures are they building, and how far are they from the location where you plan to build? Because depending on your situation and your preparedness level, you may want to have a neighbor 1 mile or 2 miles away, whereas if you're completely self-sufficient and you feel you won't need a neighbor so close, then you can find somewhere that's 5 or 10 miles away from a nearest neighbor. And all of this is based on how prepared you feel you are to be completely cut off from services and from help if you ever were to come into a circumstance where you needed the assistance. How would you get it, and how would you deal with those situations? A bird's eye view also gives you great views on different paths that may lead to your bug out location you weren't aware of. A path that could have been created recently by a new neighbor, or by, sometimes people start, hiking trails and they may cut onto your property. So these are things that I like to make sure that I look at when I purchase a bug out location. And sometimes it's a good thing to have those paths, because it gives you a way out of your location and out of your property in an emergency. You may need to access those paths, or they could be good paths for hunting or game. So those are things that you want to make sure that you take a look at, so you know which areas are going to be of use to you, and so you're prepared with what's truly happening with your property from a bird's eye view. And of course, getting drone footage is also an amazing way to go back and view the property again once you start to actually look at making an offer and comparing the different properties and ultimately making that decision of purchasing the property. I like to go back and look at things again and again before I make a decision, because when you're investing money into land, you really want to make sure that you're getting the best for your money and do a very thorough comparison. So having drone footage of your property, it gives you such a great reference to go back and compare the properties that you've looked at that you may have forgotten about, and help you remember things that you may have forgotten about the property that stand out and make it better than something else that you may be looking at a similar price, and you get the best bang for your buck. Another thing that I really suggest people look at when buying their bug out location or an off-grid property is to look at the zoning for the property that you're actually purchasing. Now, I don't want to make this video too much about purchasing property, but I do want to make sure I touch on the fact that the zoning is extremely important when you buy a bug out location or an off-grid property. The reason I'm saying that is because a lot of us have plans for these properties. We may want to build a residential, home or a small cabin on the property. Some of us may want to park, an RV or a mobile home, or even a pre-manufactured home on these properties. And depending on the zoning, you may or may not be allowed to do that with your property. So knowing the zoning and, making sure that the zoning allows you to do the things that you want to do with your property is extremely important. Depending on the zoning, you may not be able to have livestock. You may not be able to have, raise farm animals or do any farming whatsoever. It's really just depends on the property zoning. So you really want to make sure that the properties you're looking at are going to allow you to do the things you wanted to do in the long run. And I do plan to park my bus on my property, and it's essentially camping out on your property while you build. But I do want to make sure that there's no time restrictions on the amount of days that I can park on the property while I'm building and these types of things. But zoning is extremely important no matter what type of property you're purchasing. So I just wanted to make sure I touched on the zoning. And if you want to know a few more tips about how to buy land and tips on purchasing off-grid properties and land, go ahead and check out my other channel and make sure you're subscribed, because there I'm really going to be showing you guys, once I purchase the land, I'm going to be showing you guys the build and more thorough details. This is more of a personal channel, so you'll see a little bit more of my personal life and how I go about getting things done day to day and how living in the bus is day to day. So make sure that you subscribe to that channel as well. But in this video, of course, I did want to mention the zoning because that is important no matter what type of land you're buying. And along with the zoning and making sure you know what you can actually do on your property, you also want to make sure that you have a few key elements in your property in order to make sure you can survive. The first thing that I look at is the water supply and what is the water situation. Is there a well? Is there a stream that runs through the property or some sort of water that comes through the property? Some Arizona lands and desert lands have washes that run through the property, and that seriously affects the amount of buildable land that you actually have in the amount of property you purchase. But I would, of course, prefer to buy something that already has some sort of water set up, even if it's just a seasonal stream that you can set up during that season and collect water. That is highly important, especially if you're purchasing in more remote desert areas like Arizona or Nevada. There are a lot of places that don't have any water access, so you have to haul in your water. So be prepared for that. And if you do have to haul in your water, figuring out what type of rain catchment system you're going to put together for yourself and make sure that your property contains enough water for you to survive during those dry seasons and those droughts. And along with making sure that there's some sort of water on your property or water procurement method, you really want to make sure that you have unrestricted property rights with your property. With that is getting 100% of the water rights and 100% of the mineral rights that are on your property, because just because there's water running through your property doesn't mean that you have legal access to it or you're even allowed to use it. So making sure you inquire about these issues is highly important. Another thing that I like to make sure my bug out location has is that it's bordering or next to a national park or some sort of federally protected land like BLM land. Now, a lot of people don't actually want this in the property that they buy, but I personally would prefer that my property borders some sort of national park or BLM land, and I'm going to tell you why. Because I would not want to buy a property that in the next 5 years or so is going to be next to a property that's going to be sold for commercial use, and maybe they're gonna put up some sort of apartments or some sort of strip mall, or you never know, in that area. So I don't want an area that is gonna be potentially developed with more people in the future. And federally protected land and national forests are usually protected, and they don't want to build these types of structures on this natural land. So they want to make sure that they maintain it as natural as possible, because depending on the amount of acreage that you can afford, living and on bordering BLM or federally protected land can definitely expand the amount of acreage you have in your backyard, not just for water procurement, but hunting and gathering and all of these federally protected lands will become your backyard. And even though most people don't want a property that is so off grid, I do prefer it. I want to make sure that if there is 600 acres or 1,000 acres of BLM land bordering my land, I am so excited to look at those properties, because I know that not just am I purchasing the acreage, I'm purchasing that federally protected land right in front of me as my front or backyard. And I can't tell you how useful that's going to be when shit hits the fan, that there isn't a lot of people around, and in those federally protected lands, they're usually pretty empty. And most people who visit these lands are pretty nomadic souls, where, you know, either they're like van lifers or traveling around the country, you know, in their RVs or even their SUVs and just camping out. A lot of these people are a little bit more self-sufficient, so I don't mind those people coming into my neighborhood, so to speak, because they're already pretty self-sufficient people, and these are the type of people that you would want coming near or by your land, because ultimately you do want to make sure you have some sort of access to trading or bartering or those kind of things if you know, people are passing through the land. And it is also less likely that you'll, you know, encounter people who are less prepared. Most people who camp out on BLM land are usually more self-sufficient. You know, they have some sort of water. They know what it's like to camp out for weeks at a time. So they come more prepared. They have a more self-sufficient mentality and mindset because they're already off the grid to some degree. Now, I personally would prefer those types of people driving by my land at any point in time than I would prefer anyone who's completely unprepared and is just gonna wander onto the land and then become a liability. Now, getting an off-grid location, you do have to be somewhat prepared to be off-grid, which means not having so much access to electricity, also to cell phone services. So you really have to think about if this is something that's going to be an issue to you. Now, I personally do want to have access to internet and phone before shit hits the fan. Afterwards, of course, we're just going to switch to ham radios and CVs. But when society is still running, I want to make sure that I can still post videos, you know, and share things with you guys. And until shit hits the fan, you know, it's important to me to have some sort of connection to outside life besides, you know, because when you're out on remote properties, you want to make sure that, you know, you have the ability to call for help if you need it, or, you know, call out for friends if you need it, because it's always good to have, you know, people who are on your side and you're able to reach out to, and, you know, not be so far off grid. The other thing that I like to watch out for when I buy an off grid or bug out location is to look at what type of disasters these locations already have, because you may be signing up for something completely unexpected, because the place may look awesome, but it may be in a fire zone, or it may be in a flood zone. There may be a wash running through it, so you may get flooded, and that extremely limits the amount of property that you have to build on. So these are all things that you want to make sure you're aware of. You can go on the USGS website and find their flood mappings, and you can also, of course, go to the parcels and county websites to find out, you know, if there's any flooding in the area or if it's in a fire danger zone. So these are all little things that you want to know about your bug out location, because if you're bugging out there, you want to be aware of what potential dangers you may have to bug out from your bug out location. that is that an oxymoron there? But I'm just saying, you have to really make sure that you are aware of the types of disasters that already happen in those areas. And of course, water drought we just went over and is so important, but also heat waves. How hot does it get in the location that you are, and what are the extreme temperatures? These are all things that you want to look at. Can you even handle living in the most extreme temperatures that this area offers. You can go on Google and find out what the year-round weather is like. Make sure that you can handle that type of heat or cold, because a lot of people visit these places during the summer and they're looking and it looks great, but then in the winter comes and they're deep in 5 feet of snow and they have no idea how they're going to deal with it because they hate snow and they hate the cold. Make sure that you don't sign up for something you can't handle. Along with the topography, I like to make sure that there's a good balance of elevation and flat land in order for me to build on. The elevation so that I could put a security post, and I prefer to have a 360 view of the area of where I live. So I don't mind if some of it is on rolling hills or is on a hill, on a mountaintop. I would actually prefer it because I do want to set up a security post at the highest elevation of my property in order to make sure that I have a good enough warning if someone is heading towards me, and I have good visual if there is any threats coming my way. I think it's important to go over the fact that you do need some sort of security at your land. And how are you going to secure it? What is the 360 view, around, the neighborhood? And what is it that is going to give you the advantage or even a disadvantage if possible threats were to come your way? Another important factor to keep in mind is, where are you bugging out from and where are you bugging out to? And how long of a drive is it going to be for your family to actually get there? I personally would prefer to find somewhere that is anywhere between an 8-hour to 12-hour drive from my family. You want to make sure that your family is prepared for the amount of days that they're going to be bugging out to the location. Not just by keeping, the stock supplies to get them there, but also because they're going to be stuck in traffic. They may need more fuel. So all of these things are going to come into play when you're taking your bug out drive. And you want to make sure that the distance is reasonable for your family to drive in order to get there. Because if you're buying property that's more than 12 hours away, with every mile, it becomes more likely that they will come and encounter with some sort of obstacle in order for them to get to you. We have enough gas to physically get there if you don't want your family to be on foot, which they may have to be anyway, depending on the type of obstacles that come and the type of disaster that they are evacuating from. So these are all things we want to keep in mind. If they were to only drive 4 hours in and have to walk the other 4 to 6 hours, do they have enough supplies? Can they physically make the walk if they had to leave their bug out vehicle and just go on foot? The longer you expect them to walk, or the longer you expect them to travel, the more you're exposing your family to dangers, to risks that they could have already potentially been to the bug out location if it were a little closer. So I personally prefer to keep it within 8 hours to 12 hours of a drive from the location my family is bugging out from. And another very important thing for me is to make sure that the property I purchase is a little removed from any major highways or interstates, because that is where most people are going to be commuting by. And even within the first 1 to 3 miles away from the interstate, because most people, if they go on foot, they will try to travel along the interstate, even if it's a little bit more inland. And then if you are at bird's-eye view to those people, they're going to be able to get to you. And I don't want anyone to just stumble across my property. I actually prefer that it be at least 10 miles away from the nearest interstate. And I know that seems far to some people, to be driving off the interstate and be off-road for 10 miles or more. But the thing is that most people, will stick to trails. They'll stick to landmarks when they're traveling, and even if they're not walking on the interstate themselves, they're walking a mile or two away from it, they like to keep that at a bird's eye view for a point of reference. Most people will just follow natural routes So these are all things that I want to make sure I avoid, because when all of those unprepared people leave the cities, I don't want them to just stumble across my property. I definitely want to make sure that that doesn't happen. Now, I did take a road trip in order to check out these locations, but I do want to tell you a couple of extra things that may help in order to help you decide if this is the proper bug out location for you. And the first thing is to actually spend the weekend there. Take the weekend to camp out at the location that you're actually purchasing, because you want to see what it's like at night and during the day, and can you physically handle being out in a remote area. I think a lot of us tell ourselves that we can, but it's not until we're sitting there in the pitch darkness of remote of the remote areas that we camp out at, that we realize how we can handle, different types of situations in the dark, in the light, and, just being independent and self-sufficient. I believe that a lot of us, if we were challenged, could actually do it, but we don't often challenge ourselves enough to do it. So I think it's important to do a trial weekend, if you will, for the places that you're going to purchase. I like to spend at least one night at each location that I'm going to purchase, so I know what it's like at night and during the day. And not just that, but I like to explore the areas, not just during the day, but see what it's like at night. Does somebody, come and camp out there at night that you don't know about? Or, also talk to the neighbors and also talk to locals in the area and see what it's like to live in that area, what suggestions they might give you. Another thing that would be good is to just go to the local diners, go to the local shops and talk to the owners, because a lot of them are mom and pop shops, and they will give you genuine feedback about their customers and the type of people who live in their community. So that is actually very useful information, and you may not use it year round like I'm planning to, but the important part of a bug out location is that it is safe for you and your family to be at. And if you aren't really sure of what it's like being there at night, it may put your family in danger that you may not be aware of, or that is unappealing to you, and that could even help sway the decision you make on the actual land that you purchase. So all of these tips combined can definitely help you make the decision that is best for your family on the type of bug out location to purchase. And make sure that you subscribe and you hit the like button if you found any of these tips useful, because I actually was searching for something to help me find a bug out location and help guide me when buying my bug out location, and I couldn't find much out there. So I hope this helped you, and if it did, make sure you hit the like button and of course subscribe so I can see you in the next video.